But now here's tonight's Kaleidoscope feature.
Ready to go.
Hast ever seen a mine? Hast ever been down in its fabled grottos, walled with gems, and canopied with torrid mineral belts that blazed within the fiery orifice? Hast ever, by the glimmer of the lamp or the fast-waning taper, gone down, down, toward the earth's dread center, where wise men have told us that the earthquake is conceived, and great Vesuvius hath his lava house, which burns and burns forever?
Okay, when you get into the cage, just hand these tags in to the cage man so that he knows when you come up.
These are tin tokens.
It's a record of who's underground, and when we come up, we take them off the board, and then they know we're up. It's just a safety thing.
For over 3,000 years, there's been mineral production in Cornwall, which has inspired a rich theme of artistic output. In level 400, Tim Mallion and poet James Crowden journey from surface to workface at South Crofty, Europe's last working tin mine.
This is it. No turning back. The initiation. Patiently, you wait your turn and reflect upon the finer points of Cornish history, the ledger of tin, the ingot of tradition, firmly moulded underground.
Just 100 years ago, all the mines around here suffered severe crisis when pumps were stopped and the price of tin collapsed, and 100 years before that there was crisis with the copper. The 90s of almost every century have seen crisis or massive change, but despite that, mines like South Crofty have made a profit right through this century. It's only in the last decade, since the tin crash in 1985, that we've become in need of assistance.
Is that the call to the cage?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. We're going off. 200, please. 200, got your tag?
The strange sense of falling as if in flight, swallowed at one gulp down the earth's throat, the mine's gullet.
Oh, my ears are popping.
Glimpses of floors you never knew existed, and better than Harrods. Lingerie, children's shoes, ties and cravats, all of us destined for the bargain basement at 400 fathoms.
400 fathoms, nearly half a mile down, and approaching the Earth's molten core, which is why it's so hot here. Our guides through the dark tunnels are geologist John Uzoro and former miner Alan Buckley. He's just published a history of South Crofty Mine, and the threat of closure if a £4.7 million rescue package isn't agreed by the government.
We're heading north now.
What's that hissing noise?
A small air leak on the compressed air line.
Is everything run by compressed air?
About 80% of the equipment on the ground runs on compressed air, that's right.
Presumably natural water is a constant problem here. I mean, there's a stream running down on the side here.
That's right, we're well below what the natural water table would be. We're about 2,000 feet below that, so obviously you do get water influxing into the mine, and that's pumped out.
If you took from the furthest tunnel at one side to the furthest tunnel at the other, and what diameter would you have?
From one end to the other is about 2.25 miles, and probably 3/4 of a mile wide. So it's a fairly big area. And we've been working from the surface about 400 years down to the present depth.
Do you dream about mining?
No, not really. My wife says I do wake up and ask if a helmet is occasionally, but no.
This is called Anvlugen. Hebben Gwennen Priv a Lafor in Porthus, Hebben Gwennen Urbis a East Desorion Buick, Hebben Gwennen... The flower. Without the insecticide of imported labour, without the herbicide of dynamic incomers, without the fungicide of key management workers, we, the Cornish, have dug our own roots to suck tin, copper, slate and china clay from the stony ground of our land. Raised on marvellously rich manure of earlier cultures, the first industrial revolution flowered like gorse, and the greatest mining nation in the history of the world was born, Cornwall.
Cornish poet Paul Hodge was born and raised right next to South Crofty Mine, here on the Great Flat Lode, once a rich seam of copper as well as tin. This landscape is littered with the housings of long-gone steam engines which pumped out deep mine water or wound the miners' lifts. The engine house chimneys stand like memorial stones to the miners who gave their lives and the engineers who made possible the Industrial Revolution, most famously Dick Trevithick, local inventor of the high-pressure steam boiler and the first effective steam locomotive. Then, above the stacks looms Carn Bray, a softly rounded moorland hill, its original inhabitants older than Stonehenge. The Bronze Age remains bearing witness to a far earlier industrial revolution. For Paul Hodge, this is a heritage to be celebrated.
My voice is for the Cornish people, saying that this is important. It was a great past, and I think the future is pretty great as well. It's just different, but the two are linked. You can't have a future without a past. And we're all got cricks in our neck now because we're looking at something that's pretty high. We're now standing beside Fortescue shaft, which has actually contained the second largest pump engine in the whole of Cornwall. This is a particularly fine stack.
And an amazing piece of construction. I mean, just getting those massive great stones up there.
Oh yeah, the great big granite blocks. There's very little mortar in them. It's a bit like the pyramids, the way they're actually constructed.
They all tie in together.
Yeah, gaps are actually filled with stones hammered into the cracks. It's a fantastic piece of architecture.
And you've written a poem about it?
Yeah, this is a church, this is a cathedral, and that's what it's about. It's about paying homage to our ancestors, all their skill and knowledge. You know, in total contradiction to the ooar, I be from the West Country type of image. It just shatters it. Peneglos and Stenek. Chimblis of Ricus, gans nebis Kellis terrace, Cathedral of the Tin Ground. Chimneys of bricks, with some lost, broken and wind-beaten, made by people. Skilled they were in every sort of stone, a long tube of granite, a century smokeless. I see a thick wall, so high above the floor. I go inside into your great centre. Your core is air, empty as an old church. Your iron heart's stolen, but still your shape is strong. Windows without glass, arch like a chapel, floodplain of culture and lots of myths. The mines have ceased, to work no more. Today it is a wasteland where children play. Oh, Cathedral of the Tin Ground, you are amongst gorse, head spring of our roots. Thank you for raising me.
I think the experience of mining in the 20th century in Cornwall, and particularly after the Second World War, has been one of false dawns. And we're in this curious situation where mining is seen as being so essential to the strength and coherence of the Cornish identity. And yet, there's a sort of realization, sometimes only a grudging one, that if mining is to survive, it's either going to be in a non-hard rock, non-deep mining context, such as exists in the clay country up around St. Austell, or it's always going to be on the fringe, in that sort of limbo land between profitability and non-profitability.
Philip Peyton from the Institute of Cornish Studies, speaking between lectures at the world-famous Camborne School of Mines. Cornish people have long campaigned for their own university to stem the devastating brain drains which have dogged Cornish history, especially whenever the mines have fallen on hard times.
It's almost as though we are, in arguing for the survival of Cornish mining, we're putting forward not an economic argument, not even a social argument, but more of a cultural argument. And that great head frame of South Crofty tin mine, which dominates Camborne and Redruth, particularly from certain perspectives, very difficult to imagine this place, Camborne and Redruth, without it. And its disappearance, if that's what were to happen, would be a devastating, almost tragic loss of an important symbolic expression of what Cornwall is about at root for a lot of Cornish people, and indeed for a lot of people beyond Cornwall as well.
You've got a rumble coming. What's that?
A loco.
A locomotive.
Yeah. If you stand there, you'll get killed.
You can just see the light at the distance.
It's a long walk to the face, trudging between rails and pools of water. A small, stubby engine slides by, powered by a small, stubby miner who looks as though he can and will sink as many beers as possible on Saturday night.
So I tell you something that they don't like here. They ain't here, see, because this is a Crofty mine, you see. And we here are Janers. Well, we're doing Janer 21 years.
What, Wheel Jane mine?
Yeah. But these are Crofty men, most, a lot of them. Now, what they don't like to hear is here, see, that my father worked down here 21 years, and he come down here when he was a boy with my grandfather, Bill Buzzer, who was here in 1800. Now, they don't like to hear that, see.
Is there like a rivalry between Wheel Janers and Crofty people?
No, they are. They don't like the Janers. One-eyes, they call them, see.
One-eye?
One-eyes, yeah, that's what they call them, Janers. But then, after these men here got this lovely granite, they wouldn't drill a hole over a Janer, because ground is a lot rougher. Here, they got lovely smooth drilling. I'm saying, my granny was dead 10 years, she could drill this ground. But here, they got lovely smooth holes and that.
So if this place closed, what would you do?
Not a lot. Yeah, it's sorry, Dave, the mine shut. And what is Cornwall at a tin mine?
The amphitheatre, a vast vault, a granite cathedral unexpected, like Paddington Station, opens up, and we step into it with awe and disbelief.
Song of the Hard Rock Men, performed by the Holman Climax Choir. Holman Climax are famous names in Cornish mine engineering. Male voice choirs remain a crucial part of the Cornish culture, especially amongst the older generation. Conductor and musical director Roger Wills led the choir 400 fathoms down to a vast cave at the bottom of South Crofty mine to find the most acoustically appropriate venue.
It does maintain for us this very strong sense of community, which is very much part of Cornwall. The Song of the Hard Rock Men talks about the tireless miners of Cornwall, how they were skilled, how they were injured sometimes, and how, because of the mines eventually closing, those miners were made to move, and now, of course, they live all over the world. And it's certainly said that at the bottom of every pit, you'll find a Cornish miner.
There's the first Cornish captain in Ely. That might be an Italian, that might be a Norwegian, and that might be a Croat. They didn't want the men talking to each other. 41 different nationalities worked under Cornishmen in northern Minnesota. And the captains figured that as long as you weren't talking to each other, you might get a little work done.
In front of a packed audience in Camborne Library, Iron Mike Hillman describes the life and times of Camborne's Captain Charlie Trezona, who emigrated to Ely, North Minnesota, ran both mine and town, and married a Camborne girl. Hillman reminds me of Garrison Keeler. He runs a successful independent radio station in Ely, Radio WELY, and is a passionate local historian. After the Ely mine had closed, with half an hour's notice, causing widespread depression, all visible remains were obliterated, like many of the industrial sites of northern England, which have been demolished without trace, as if they never existed.
It took us about 25 years before we realized that this is what we had. Our mining is alive in Ely in spirit because people like me remember it. But I go down to the Sedan mine and I meet wonderful people from all over the world who wanted to know about this place. You can mine history forever. I'd give it away all day long. I'd give the stories away to anybody that wanted to hear them, and at the end of the day, you want to know what? Had just as much left, if not more. Because I'd share my story with you, and maybe you had a grandpa. Maybe you had some connection. You have one last mine. If you can't save it as a real producing tin mine, then save it as a monument and an actual mine where you can mine Cornish heritage forever. You'll never run out of it.
All cultures and all societies rely on memory as much as what's happening now and what they hope will happen in the future. And if that's eradicated by the fact that life moves so quickly and we forget things so easily, then it's my job to try to chronicle that, in a sense.
Cornishman Nick Dark's musical play King Tang Mine was a great success for the National Theatre, and even more so for the Cornish Knee-High Company. It tells the story of a mine taken over by a rich entrepreneur who flogged it off when tin prices fell at the turn of the century. The theme is a recurring, highly relevant one. Right now, forces beyond Cornwall's control, like the value of the pound, threaten existing mining jobs, whilst the theme park heritage industry gradually purchases Cornwall's past.
I write about what makes me angry very often. And what makes me feel angry is when a place and a culture and people that I know very, very well, which is here, is threatened and swamped by outside forces.
Would I be right in thinking it's almost easier to treat the present by looking at the past?
Absolutely, because drama is symbolizing, it's taking the essence of something, of a problem, and simplifying it to the point where you create a dialectic, and then you explore that. And for me, the thing that angers me most at the moment is what is being done to Cornwall in the name of the tourist trade, because I think that's the greatest threat, not only to Cornwall, but to many places throughout the world. I don't think it's a local problem. I think it's a global problem. It's a question of how we treat the environment and how we look upon the environment and treat people who have a strong link with a particular place, and how outsiders come into a place and alter it, and alter people's perceptions about it. And that's what I'm fighting against as a playwright.
Hewn out of granite, faces chisel the dark, are caught briefly in each other's headlamps.
Is it my imagination, or is it getting hotter here?
Yeah, it does get a bit warmer, a bit more humid. There are places where the air temperature goes up to about 33 degrees centigrade and the humidity is 98-99%.
That's a serious hole. How deep is that hole below us?
It goes all the way down to the full 45 fathom level. Quite a considerable volume and tonnage has come out of this state.
So it's about a 200-foot drop down below us.
Yeah, into the blackness. Impressive though, isn't it?
It is.
Massive hole. And you think
Big hole.
Right up to surface at this mine, and in hundreds of mines like it in Cornwall, this is what you've got under your feet. Hundreds of millions of tons of rock removed from near to the surface, right the way down through in all the mining districts of Cornwall. Have you read that John Harris poem about Dark Oath and stoping and working in the mine? And that was written 130, 40 years ago, and it is just as we see it now.
Here the dull god of gloom, unrivaled, reigns, and wraps himself in palls of pitchy dark. Hast ever breathed its sickening atmosphere, heard its dread throbbings when the rock has burst, leapt at its sneezings in the powder blast, and trembled when the groaning, splitting earth, mass after mass, fell down with deadliest crash?
He was at the hard end of what many of the other poets of the 19th century simply romanticized from a distance. There's a great sort of sense of a rite of passage in Harris. You go from sort of the darkness and the depth and the claustrophobia to the great light and power of standing atop Cornwall, you know. And these are things that are really important to human experience, I think. You know, people do go to work and get cramped into the office or cramped into the mine shaft, and they do go and stand on cliff tops and look out across the ocean and feel liberated. And there's that tremendous sense of the contrast which actually make human life bearable.
Bert Biscoe, poet, songwriter, and independent county councillor. There's 22 independents on a council of 79. Bert's also the coordinator of Verbal Arts Cornwall, which promotes the written and spoken word. He believes passionately in the power of Cornish art to dispel collective depression.
It is one way of describing Cornwall at the moment as a place, as an economy, as a society, is that it is on the sick list of Europe. Well, I can tell you that deep in the boots and the souls of the people of Cornwall, they want off that sick list.
So is it the artist's job to contribute towards leaving that sick list?
Artists now are beginning to grasp that there is a role to play in terms of exploring the past to find an expression of the present which will catapult us into the future. And they find here, amongst the physical artifacts, the physical landscape, and amongst the people increasingly, that there's an output from what they do as artists which can support and give expression to how people feel about themselves. And when you feel good about being yourself, then you feel confident about celebrating your discoveries, your innovations, and your willingness to toil. Oh, Dick, your revolution's done. Your deeds and inventions fill old Passmore's shelves and are behind you once and for all. Come, Dick Trevidick, engineer, inventor, adventurer, Cornishman. Join us, your people, as we pick up again the rhythm and steps of our dance, the dance of the Cornish air.
Nancy, pretty Nancy, well, what do you say? Will we stand our ground proudly and one and all stay? Will we live through these storms? Do we anchor at rest and cradle this land to our rebellious breast?
The Berlingi Troil Band. Troil's the Cornish for Cayley. Berlingi is a village near Perranporth, venue for the annual Pan-Celtic Festival of St. Piran, and a prime international surfing venue. In a fruitful merging of ancient and modern, the presence of cosmopolitan youth out for a good time has encouraged local bands like the Berlingis to come together. The Jack and Jenny Band also play at the Festival of St. Piran. He's the patron saint of Cornwall, a fabulous carouser who is said to have floated across from Ireland on a granite millstone and taught the Cornish how to smelt tin. Methodism did its best to eradicate carousing and wild music, but by disguising old tunes as hymns, it also helped save the indigenous tradition.
Certainly, a lot of the music that we've got today that's being used in the revival of the traditional music used for dance and so on has been
handed down from the Methodist tradition, and they're the tunes that we've got to work on and to use as polkas and marches and tunes for dancing.
You know, a lot of the music was just diverted into Methodism as opposed to it being...
And now being reclaimed back again.
This is part of reclaiming a pride of place.
I mean, do you think that's important for the future?
Yes. Obviously, you've got to try and retain the identity of a tradition while allowing it to evolve as well, and that's a difficulty.
And if we can kind of capture that and...
Yeah, that's very important, because with traditional things, it's very easy to hark back to the past. It's very easy to hark back to your sort of picture postcard, ruined mind stack, you know, piskies and all the rest of it. And it's very easy just to think that that is a label fixed on a culture and that's how it is. So what we're interested in is the other side of that, is bringing something forward, getting young people involved, making it something that's living and evolving and not stuck in the past, which is very easy. It's very easy for that to happen with revived traditions.
At last, the face, the ultimate frontier, chiselled away, blasted, explored, plotted, eased out.
It's a man working in a really, really confined space, right up against the rock.
He drills all the holes that he needs to for that particular round that he's taking.
And he's ramming explosives inside.
That's right.
What are the wires hanging down? Those are the
detonator cables, and he will connect them last of all.
No, it would be a big shame if this actually shuts, because the resource is still here in Cornwall, underground in several locations. This is the last reserve of expertise in hard rock metalliferous mining in the country. And at some point in the future, if the price is right of the various minerals, there will be mining again in Cornwall, because the resource is still there.
Solidity compressed, the dust and water fueling a stream, a haze within which they live as if on a cliff edge in a storm.
Called the Tinner's Coast, this stretch here from St. Ives to St.Ives, and it's a very ancient landscape. There's Bronze Age cairns out on the headland here, and people have been coming here for the tin for thousands of years. Some people say that the cairns were left by the Phoenicians, and right here where I'm working, people have been coming out and they've been dumping stuff down the mine shafts. You'll find the mines are choked with the bones of more recent inventions, and I've been playing a game for 15 years now. In this landscape, I wander around picking up bits and pieces that I find, pretending I'm an archaeologist. But an archaeologist with a difference.
Sculptor David Kemp's workshop stands on the sea cliffs between the redundant Giva mine shaft, resurrected as a tourist attraction, and the old mine counting house, currently being re-roofed by the National Trust. In front of his workshop is the mine shaft that never was, new winding gear for a new Giva shaft which has never opened. The place reeks of history, with which Kemp plays brilliantly, upsetting our received concepts of time, space and heritage, trying to make sense of our present from 4,000 years in the future as an archaeologist with the Department of Reconstruction.
Ah yes, these are the hounds of Giva, relics of a vast underground workforce. Each of these hounds could feed up to 3.5 families. They worked underground and they rarely saw the light of day. They're dispersed now, I'm afraid, and these are the last ones left. Most of them have already left the county to find work in other places. We have to...
Realistic though they may seem, each hound is made up of 3.5 pairs of miners' Wellington boots, rescued from Giva's closure. Their welly ears remind me of Snoopy dogs. Then there's what looks like a medieval battle helmet, constructed from piston rings, headlight container, tractor grill, and lorry horns.
Beep beep, see, bent round and up. They were chariot people. They discovered the wheel, they put the wheel on the chariot, and they followed the sun westwards. They got here as far west as they could get without getting their feet wet. And we think these are the ruins of their civilization, Cassette race.
On the opposite wall of this museum of the 6th millennium, there's a dread mask, which on close inspection has camera lenses for eyes, copper wire for the nose and mouth, and a necklace of burned tyres.
It's called The Heat in Africa, and it's one of a series of masks of this society. I mean, there's an irony here. I'm making things that on the first sight look like primitive masks. Well, that kind of society has long disappeared. We've overwhelmed it. But, you know, when you're creating African masks, this is a new African mask. I mean, this is what's happening in Africa now.
And it is really powerful, and it has a kind of feel of a deity about it, even after you've realised that it's got 2 optical lenses, 2 camera lenses as eyes.
I'm putting together things that look familiar. I mean, their configuration is on the surface familiar. It's the kind of things that we find in museums, and we're proud of our museums that contain a way of life that we've made impossible. But when you look closely, they're made of everyday objects, things that we recognise. And the irony is that what will the future make of us? We're very confident about ourselves and our technology, but what is that perspective that the future will have of us. And there is a point to that, because the point is the things that we are doing now will have consequences. We are leaving our own kind of heritage, and that kind of heritage is not necessarily going to give our descendants the kind of options that we have.
2, maybe 3,000 years, gone in a twinkling. Sandwiched between land and sea, they chisel out and blast the sweat-laden air.
And what level are we at now?
We're on the 430 sub-level on the number 4 load. You can appreciate the temperature here is probably about 30 degrees, and the humidity is really muggy. Humidity is really high. The moment you start lifting things and doing work, it feels twice as bad as it does just standing here now.
You haven't got ladders up there, you've got guys going up and down on chains, yeah?
That's right, yes. That's how you access the working at the top of the raise. You climb up with a chain between your legs, and you pull all your gear up, your drill and your box of explosives up on a rope behind you.
So you don't want to be slipping when you do that?
Definitely not. It's one of the more dangerous activities that go on in the mine.
It's a bit like mountaineering mining sometimes.
It can be, yes.
This is the end here.
That's the end of this is the last development heading in Crofty, and it's now coming to an end.
So if you get the money, then you'll continue from here. If you don't, that's it.
That's right. This will be where the last long-haul rig finishes.
Ice cream and surf and car parks are no substitute. They hold on till the last minute, like a schooner in distress whose last flares have gone up into a troubled sky.
South Crofty's fate hangs in the balance, dependent on the whim of the government in London, the price of the pound, and mines abroad who undercut Crofty by paying slave wages. All this, on top of an ailing fishing fleet and existing high unemployment, leaves Cornwall feeling powerless and depressed. Or does it? The first step in coping with depression is to voice its existence, to shame, isolation, impotence, and anger. Only then is there space for understanding, self-respect, connection with others, joy. If this is true for the individual, then why not for the community? Cornwall has a sense of community, far more than in most places, and respected local artists in abundance, who encourage laughter, tears, understanding, pride, anger, above all, self-confidence. Money is useful, of course, but without voice, there's only darkness and emptiness, like a mine without miners.
Don't fear to trust me, for I have been there, from morn till night, from night till dewy morn, gasping within its burning sulphur cloud, straining mine eyes along its ragged walls, and wondering at the uncouth passages dashed in the sparry cells by fancy's wand, and oft have paused and paused again to hear the eternal echo of its emptiness.
The poet D.M. Thomas reading The Mine by John Harris, ending tonight's Kaleidoscope feature. The programme was presented by Tim Mallion and produced by Adrian Washbourne.
It's a gift. There are certain people that it just comes so easy to, no formal training whatsoever.
For others, a divine experience. Something more spiritual or far removed from the world, their equivalent of heaven. The garden, more than just a place.
Indeed, very orient. And we do indeed come from all different bits of Cornwall, and we've collected our material from all different places within Cornwall, and then we've done our own thing with it, because we like to have one foot on the ground and one foot dancing around. That's off the past, coats off the future. And this one is a very old 17th century Cornish dance, Joan Sanderson.
strawberry leaves do make the young maiden fair. So they do. And it's sung all in Cornish, and if you don't understand Cornish, you'll just have to try and work it out. It's what happens between a young man and a young woman.
Subtle feat. Thank you, Sam Jago. We'll leave you now with a little collection of tunes, again, all very old tunes, some of which may well be known to you because they're carol tunes. Because the oldest carol tunes are, of course, actually dance tunes. A carol being a dance. And here's a few we've resurrected that are obviously intended to be played on the bagpipes. Anybody with any
And
vision,
danced too.
anybody with any vision would recognise that straight away.
They were Cornish bagpipes.
Education room, and that will involve a whole range of subjects they'll have to budget for their exhibition, do language.
Hilary Coleman, Liz Davis, Joanna Tagney. Fabulous. It makes up Gwariorion. We better continue our Cornish lesson. I better ask the dumb question. What does Gwariorion mean? Which I've pronounced in 15 different ways already this programme.
Gwari means play and Orion means people, so we're player people.
You fuse both languages. I describe you as bilingual, which you probably are, but in the song we just had a burst of Cornish and then standard English. In a sense, you're not looking back or being nostalgic, are you? This seems to me a sort of way of keeping Cornish culture alive, very much in sympathy with what Stephen's just been talking
Yeah,
about.
very much, yeah. I mean, we've got a bit of a slogan, really, which is old Cornish tunes, new Cornish music, where we want to explore back, but we also want to explore forward. And what we do is take the old tunes and play around with them in the way we know how.
What are your plans for the summer?
To have fun. Wherever we can. And whenever there's people around, we'll play some music. Yeah.
Well, thanks very much for joining us. And I can tell you that if you want to catch Gwariorion, they'll be at the Tahiti Country Park near Camborne on the 17th of July. Tahiti. Okay. Tahiti Country Park. Now, back to the takedown.
When I get blue, man, or Seville or Moses take. I'm gravy, I just for a weekend tour. Green Agus, Betty, Puddin' Agus, Blue Melon. Me friends several are to Saraway, Kentucky or Seville or Moses take. Moses take. Here in the girls like zero records broken Agus Frederick Puddin' Agus Blue Melon. Is there a betray a Saraway Kentucky or Seville or Moses take.
It was a Cornish song performed by Will Coleman on whistle and Pete Berryman on guitar. Will, what was that song about?
That's called Kaleidoscope, which is Strawberry Leaves. It's actually a courting song between a man and a maid, and go for a little walk, and certain things happen betwixt the two of them, and one thing leads to another, that sort of song.
A common theme in many traditions, but the Cornish tradition. It was a Cornish. Cornish nationalism doesn't have the same high profile as some of the other movements in the British Isles, but I'm off to meet some of the movers and shakers in Cornwall.
Well, Mebane Cernow's main aim is to get more power back in the hands of the Cornish people, to have some sort of self-governing nation that can actually hold its own within Europe.
People tend to think of Britain as perhaps the poor north and the rich south. The wages in Cornwall are traditionally the lowest in the UK. You look at any wage stats over the last 20 or 30 years and the Cornish wages are always the lowest. Cornish unemployment is almost invariably twice the UK average, and the Cornish economy seems unfortunately to depend largely on the tourism industry. We'd like to be able to actually establish some sustainable economic development in Cornwall, something that's not going to be to adversely affect the economy, but it's actually going to bring some meaningful long-term jobs into Cornwall.
So you would advocate, for example, the teaching of Cornish in Cornish schools in the same way that they teach Welsh in schools in Wales?
Oh, definitely, because it's not just a language. You can get all the grammar and syntax, etc., of Latin taught through Cornish, but people have names from their surnames from the Cornish language. They live in places that are named in Cornish, and it's ridiculous that they don't know the meaning of that, and it's ridiculous that they haven't got any idea of the great richness of their own cultural environment. And to a great extent, it's English nationalism that is keeping that down, English oppression.
One of the great failings of Cornwall is that it still hasn't got its own university. Most people's opinion of Cornwall comes from external visions of the land. You've had a lot of writers come to Cornwall, Daphne du Maurier, Evie Thompson, people like that, who've taken the Cornish worldview to the world, really, but in a way it's been a false and a romantic vision, which I'm not sure was there in the first place. There's very limited opportunities for young people to express their own culture, to read about their own culture.
How many people are there like you in Cornwall who can actually have a conversation with each other in Cornish?
There's roughly about 200 fluent speakers.
What would you say to those people who say, well, it's a dead language by now?
Ninju hena gwir, I ma'n iaith cyrnaw in fyw, ag ti o leferol pyddafinta in iaith ma.
Nyr enni causal Gairreitha Saesnic Warbath Deleuzius.
Gwir.
30th of May to the 1st of June at the Ramada Hotel in Reading. For centuries, Cornwall had a proud and distinctive culture of its own, but in the 20th century it's faded away almost to nothing. However, in the last few years there has been a cultural reawakening in Cornwall, which will be symbolised by a march next Saturday from the Lizard Peninsula to Blackheath. This will retrace the steps of a Cornish uprising in 1497. Among the marchers will be musicians who've been trying to recreate the vanished musical traditions of Cornwall. Alison Prane has been talking to them.
The farmer hath no corn can he sow if the...
My father used to say about Cornwall, it is like a tree. When there's a drought, the outer leaves will go first. And when things start getting better, he said, we're the last to get the benefit. And it's true.
There is in Cornwall a historical and deep-seated feeling of frustration. It came to a head in 1497 with the March on London by Joseph Angoff and his rebels, and is very apparent again now. Cornish people are beginning to look to their own language and traditions in order to assert their Cornishness. Mervyn Davey is a Cornish folk musician and plays, amongst many other things, in his own Cornish ceilidh band.
I think over the past few years there's been a general reawakening of Cornish consciousness, and therefore we get demand, we do ceilidh, yes. It will be Cornish, won't it? Oh yes, if you like, we'll do that, no problem. So because there's an increased interest in that, there's increased demand for that.
This demand for all things Cornish reveals an interesting situation. Although the famous May festivals at Padstow and Helston have survived through the centuries, Cornish music in general was to fall prey to the all-embracing influence of Methodism, which gripped the county in the 19th century. Dr. Richard McGrady of Exeter University.
The very deliberate movement of the Wesleys to actually build upon traditional music with their own devotional words meant, I think, a lot of the focusing and turning of a popular music tradition into this hymn, and in Cornwall in particular, this carol movement, so that a lot of the more secular popular songs, those concerned with love and the normal pattern of living, were perhaps disregarded. I'm sure they were sung, I'm sure they continued, but the energy of a lot of the movement was really diverted into this enthusiasm for this new religion. This tradition which developed throughout the 19th century and developed into a mining carol tradition which still survives and still very much part of the Cornish day-to-day traditional life within the chapel.
He's interviewing an elderly couple in Goonhaven, asking, they're doing dancing. Oh no, no dancing, didn't do dancing, Methodist, see? Oh, fair enough. You know, I sort of dropped the tune in, the serpent dance. Oh, the serpentine walk, you mean? And out it came. What they did, they used this walk, which was a dance, to pair up for the evening. Couples would pair up. That's how she met her husband, you see. And that was delightful, but it wasn't dancing. If you say dances, they wouldn't know it.
So Cornwall emerged from the 19th century with a folk tradition unique amongst the Celtic nations. This rich and varied culture, however, was almost completely lost in the second half of this century. Arthur Biddick has lived all his life in Cornwall and recalls what happened after the Second World War.
A lot of the old men were too old to go on with that, and the younger generation didn't seem to want it. Well, a lot of them married girls from up country. So you see, they weren't going to bring their wives back to Cornwall if there was nothing here. My brothers and I have played a few pieces, since. But, of course, we're getting to the time now that we don't get together, and so it'll just die away.
For some time, however, there's been a movement to stop this from happening. Mervyn Davey and singer Mo Keast have been collecting Cornish songs and dances for over 20 years. And as the ideal of a uniquely Cornish tradition has grown, more and more people are becoming interested in reviving the old music, drawing on as wide a variety of sources as possible. Francis Bennett plays the fiddle in a Cornish dance band.
When I joined Ross Celtic, the dance group, I listened to the other musicians and I played, in the same way that they were playing. There weren't any other fiddle players in the group then, and that worried me a bit to start with, because there's many different ways you can play the fiddle and different expressions and so on. But I have also heard old recordings of people playing Cornish music, say about 50 years ago, when in Boscastle they still had a dancing tradition, and most of the people doing it were quite old. So I was really excited to hear a tape of this music, because before then I'd only ever heard the musicians playing Cornish music from the revived tradition. I hadn't ever heard anybody playing it who had the tradition handed down.
My sort of mission in life has been to try and revive the Cornish pipes. If you look in the Cornish language, there are a lot of references to bagpipes. The Eskimos have lots of words for snow, and the Cornish have lots of words for bagpipes. What I did, I looked at some of the bench ends, some of the carvings, and there's a delightful carving in Alton Church of a double-chanted bagpipe, and I had a reconstruction based upon that.
I got involved back in the 60s in folk music in Cornwall, and I was very, very lucky that there was still traditional singers living in the North Cornwall area at that time. I learnt a whole big wedge of songs off them. You pick them up, you don't really go out of the way to learn them, and you hear them so much you absorb them by osmosis, really.
Johnny, won't you come along now? Johnny, won't you wait for a while? Come along, John, with your big boots on.
But it will take more than osmosis to restore a lost tradition to a whole generation. Francis Bennett feels that it's important to teach today's children about their own music.
Cornish music is played and appreciated by so few people, really, that I think it's time to get the children playing their own music. So our idea is just to go in and do workshops with the children of whatever age and whatever musical ability, and do a little introduction to folk music, explain that there's a type of music which is Cornish music, play some to them, get them talking about it a little bit, and have a sort of an opportunity for them to try out whatever instruments available. Our idea is to teach all or part of a Cornish tune.
There with him on the ground, on the bank where the primroses grow. Oh yeah, and she heard
There's a calendar of events that seem to be developing every year. There seems to be something new happening in some village or other. I hope that people will actually get to recognise Cornish music and will see Cornish music and dancing and won't have to come up and say, what sort of music is this?
go to any Celtic nation, and there's music there, music and dancing. Wales has kept theirs going. Scotland has kept theirs going. Well, ours is gradually coming back, but I'd like to see it come faster. I hope it will.
Alison Prane reporting from Cornwall. That march begins next Saturday and is due to arrive in Blackheath on the 21st of June, and the anniversary celebrations end with a concert at the Barbican Centre in London on the 29th of June. The question, what can science do?
The tidal wall of social democracy. Europe was sick and infected. At Harvard University in June 1947, Secretary of State George Marshall had prescribed the remedy.
The truth of the matter is that Europe's requirements for the next 3 or 4 years of foreign food and other essential products, principally from America, are so much greater than her present ability to pay that she must have substantial additional help or face economic, social, and political deterioration of a very grave character.
The Marshall Plan, America's answer to the challenge facing the free world, was conceived at Harvard that day. Marshall Aid sped the wheels of Europe's productive machinery, and it did something else. It gave the Western nations, for the first time in history, common tasks to work for and common interests to defend. The first major test of the Western powers came on June the 28th, 1948, when the Soviet Union clamped her blockade on Berlin. For 318 days and nights, a never-ending supply of food, fuel, and other essentials was flown over the blockade and into Berlin. 190,000 individual flights by British and American planes brought more than 1.5 million tons to the capital's isolated western zone. European confidence in the might of the democracies was restored. And then, a year after the inception of Marshall Aid, came a new comradeship in defense, the North Atlantic Pact, signed by 12 free nations of the Western world. In Washington, Foreign Secretary Ernest Bevin spoke for Britain.
At last, democracy is no longer a series of isolated units. It has become a cohesive organism determined to fulfill its great purpose.
Is the pact a new milestone in humanity's arduous trek towards sanity and peace? Or is it just another fortress against a new dragon of war? The sounds of time will answer. Men can live secure in friendship, competing only in the arts and sports of peace. And men of all nations can sing together as they sang on that brilliant summer afternoon in August 1948 at the opening of the Olympic Games in London.